Part 1. The Viridia Prime Station hung in the silent dark like a silver seed planted among the stars. Its curved halls gleamed under soft light, and its observation decks offered views of swirling nebulae and distant suns. Inside, the air hummed with quiet tension. Representatives from 27 spacefaring civilizations had gathered for the Triennial Concord, a rare meeting meant to keep peace across the galaxy. Most had come in hope. A few came in suspicion. None expected what was about to happen. Among the delegations, humanity's group stood out, not because they were loud or flashy, but because they were so often ignored. Their leader, Daniel Carter, wore a simple gray suit with no medals or badges. He was in his late 40s with tired eyes and a calm voice that rarely rose above a murmur. Beside him sat Lena Ruiz, a strategist known for her sharp mind and sharper patience. She watched the room like a hawk, noting every glance, every whisper, every shift in posture. They had spent months preparing for this summit, studying every treaty, every past grievance, every hidden agenda. They came not to argue but to listen, and to be heard in return. But from the start it was clear the Council did not see them as equals. The Virellans, tall reptilian beings with scaled skin and cold yellow eyes, dominated the discussions. Their leader, High Speaker Zorath, spoke slowly, each word dripping with quiet authority. He claimed to speak for stability, for balance, for the greater harmony of the galaxy. But his proposals always seemed to favor the old powers, the ones who had ruled the stars long before humans built their first starship. On the third day of talks, Zorath introduced a new resolution. It was wrapped in careful language about ecological preservation and controlled expansion. But beneath the polished words lay a simple truth. It would stop humanity from settling. Any new worlds beyond the Orion Arm. No explanation was given for why only humans were affected. No data was presented to justify the restriction. It was presented as if it were obvious, as if humanity were a child who needed to be kept in check. Daniel stood when it was his turn to speak. He did not raise his voice. He simply asked why this rule applied only to humans. He pointed out that other species, including the Virellans themselves, had expanded aggressively in recent decades, sometimes into systems already claimed by smaller civilizations. He reminded the room that humans had never seized a world by force. Every colony they built had been on empty or abandoned planets or with the full consent of local inhabitants. A few delegates nodded. The Cathari, insectoid beings with smooth black carapaces and glowing eyes, tilted their heads slightly, a sign of interest. But most remained silent. The Dralvok, massive and stone-skinned, stared straight ahead. The Lumen, jellyfish-like beings floating in water-filled suits, pulsed faintly but gave no clear reaction. And Zorath merely smiled, a thin curl of his lip that showed too many teeth. "The human species," he said, "moves too quickly. Your emotions cloud your judgment. Your history is short, your actions rash. The Council must act not out of malice, but caution." Lena leaned toward Daniel and whispered, "He's not debating policy. He's questioning our right to exist as equals." Daniel knew she was right, but he kept his composure. He asked for time to review the proposal, to consult with Earth's government. The Council granted him 24 hours, less than the standard 48, but he did not protest. Back in their quarters, the human team worked through the night. They drafted counter-arguments, compiled records of every peaceful human settlement, and prepared a formal appeal based on the original Concord Charter, which promised equal rights to all signatory species. The next morning, they returned to the chamber with hope. But the moment Daniel stepped forward to speak, the council chair, a weary-looking Zenthar named Morel, interrupted him. "Due to time constraints," she said, her voice echoing through the crystal dome, "the Council will move to a vote on Resolution 47B immediately." Daniel blinked. "But we were promised time to present our case." "The schedule has changed," Morel replied, not meeting his eyes. Lena stood. "This is a violation of procedure." A Virellan aide murmured something to Morel, who nodded once. "The matter is closed. All in favor?" Hands rose. Voices called out in agreement. Only a few abstained. None opposed. The resolution passed with little discussion. The humans stood in stunned silence as the vote was recorded and sealed. That evening, in a small lounge overlooking the starfields, Daniel and Lena sat with the rest of their team. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Marcus Bell, their youngest delegate and a former engineer from Mars Colony Theta, broke the quiet. "They didn't just reject our argument," he said. "They refused to hear it." Priya Nair, their science advisor, added softly, "It wasn't about logic. It was about power." Daniel looked out the window at the endless dark. He thought of Earth, of cities lit by dawn, of children learning in classrooms, of farmers tending fields under open skies. Humanity had reached for the stars not to conquer, but to understand. And now, after decades of cooperation, sacrifice, and restraint, they were being treated like a problem to be managed. He turned to the group. "We came here in good faith. We followed every rule. We showed respect. And what did we get? A backroom decision that strips us of our rights without even a hearing." Lena met his gaze. "What do we do?" Daniel took a slow breath. "We leave." There were murmurs of surprise, but no objections. They all knew staying would mean accepting second-class status. It would mean teaching future generations that their voices didn't matter unless approved by others. The next morning, the human delegation packed their belongings. They did not make a scene. They did not issue angry statements. They simply walked out of the Viridia Prime station and boarded their shuttle. As the engines hummed to life, Daniel looked back one last time at the great silver ring of the summit hall. Inside, the council continued its business as if nothing had changed. But outside, in the cold void between stars, something had shifted. Humanity had walked away, not in defeat but in dignity. And though no one in that chamber realized it yet, their silence would soon become the loudest warning the galaxy had ever heard. Part 2. Back on Earth, the news spread fast. Screens in every city flashed with headlines. Humans walk out of Galactic Summit. Some people cheered. Others worried. In schools, cafes, and spaceports, the same question echoed, "What happens now?" The government stayed quiet at first. No speeches, no press conferences. Just a short statement saying the delegation had returned and was debriefing. But in homes and on street corners, voices rose. Some called the council arrogant. Others feared humanity would be left alone in a galaxy that never truly accepted them. Daniel Carter and Lena Ruiz landed in Geneva late at night. Rain fell softly as they stepped off the shuttle. No crowd waited for them. No reporters shouted questions. Just a few officials with umbrellas and tired faces. They were driven to a secure building near Lake Geneva, where they met with Earth's Planetary Council. The mood was heavy. Some leaders were angry. Others were scared. One minister asked if they had acted too rashly. Daniel simply said they had acted with honor. That was enough for most. Meanwhile, far from Earth on Mars Colony Theta, two people watched the same news with different eyes. Marcus Bell sat in the colony's main observatory, his fingers tapping nervously on the console. Beside him, Priya Nair studied a set of star charts, her brow furrowed. They had returned from Viridia Prime with the rest of the team but were reassigned quickly, back to their old posts, back to quiet work. Yet neither could forget what they'd seen. For days, Priya had been tracking strange energy patterns near the edge of the solar system. At first she thought it was solar flares or instrument error, but the signals kept coming, pulsing in a rhythm too regular to be natural. She ran simulations, compared data from deep space probes, and cross-referenced old military logs. The pattern matched one thing: gravitic resonance, a type of weapon banned under the Concord Accords. Only a few species had the tech, and one of them, the Virellans, had just pushed humanity out of the peace talks. She showed Marcus the data. He didn't speak at first. Then he said, "If they're testing weapons this close to human space, they're not just flexing power. They're preparing," Priya nodded. "But who will believe us? The council won't listen. We're not even in the room anymore." Marcus stared at the screen where a tiny blip blinked near the Kuiper belt. "Then we find someone who will." Back on Earth, the silence from the government began to shift. Small updates trickled out. Trade routes were being reviewed. Defense drills increased, but no one mentioned the Virellans by name, not yet. The fear was real. What if speaking up made things worse? But another feeling grew too: resolve. People remembered stories from history, times when standing quiet meant losing everything. Maybe this was one of those times. Across the galaxy, the council tried to act as if nothing had changed. Official statements called the human withdrawal regrettable but not critical. Zorath gave interviews saying humanity needed time to mature. But behind closed doors, Doubt crept in. The Cathari, always observant, began digging. They pulled old records. They studied human behavior over the last 50 years. What they found surprised them. Humans had helped rebuild 3 colonies after asteroid strikes. They'd shared medical tech with the Lumen during a plague. They'd refused to sell weapons to warlords in the Cygnus sector, even when offered huge sums. In every case, they asked for nothing in return. The Cathari elder, Vexus, sat in her chamber surrounded by glowing data streams. She turned to her aide and said, "We assumed their passion made them dangerous, but perhaps it makes them trustworthy." On Viridia Prime, whispers grew. A few younger delegates asked why the humans were treated so harshly. Why was their voice silenced? No one gave a good answer. Even some Virellans looked uneasy. The resolution had passed, yes, but at what cost? Back on Mars, Marcus and Priya worked in secret. They couldn't send an official alert. Earth Command had ordered all non-essential comms silent to avoid provoking the Council. So they used old civilian channels patched through relay stations no one monitored anymore. They sent the data to a few trusted contacts, a retired Cathari analyst, a Lumen trader known for honesty, and a Dralvok historian who once praised human poetry. It was a risk. If caught, they could be charged with violating interstellar communication laws. But they sent it anyway. Days passed. No reply came. Marcus started to think no one cared. Then one evening, a message blinked on Priya's private terminal. It was short. Just 3 words. "We see it." The sender ID was blocked, but the encryption signature matched Cathari High Command. Priya's hands shook as she showed Marcus. He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. They're watching. On Earth, Daniel met with Lena in a quiet park near the Alps. Snow dusted the trees. They walked without speaking for a while. Finally, Lena said, "Do you think we did the right thing?" Daniel looked at the mountains, white and strong against the sky. "We didn't choose this fight, but we chose not to kneel. That's all we could control," she nodded. "Now we wait." But waiting didn't mean doing nothing. Across human space, engineers upgraded shield harmonics. Pilots ran silent drills. Scientists shared findings in hushed networks. No one shouted. No one panicked. But everyone prepared. And far beyond the orbit of Neptune, near the icy rocks of the Kuiper Belt, the strange energy pulses grew stronger. Something was being tested. Something powerful. Something meant to dominate. The galaxy still thought humanity had backed down. They were wrong. Humans had simply stepped back to see the whole board. And soon, the Council would learn that silence was not surrender. It was the calm before the storm. Part 3 weeks passed. The galaxy moved on, or tried to. Trade ships sailed between stars. News drones buzzed with gossip about minor border disputes and cultural festivals. The Council held routine sessions, discussing water rights on desert moons and copyright laws for alien music. But beneath the surface, tension grew like a slow fever. The Virellans, emboldened by their victory at Viridia Prime, began pushing harder. They claimed control over 3 neutral trade hubs along the Perseus Rim, small stations where merchants from a dozen species met to exchange goods, data, and stories. The Virellans called it temporary oversight for security reasons. Everyone else saw it for what it was, the first step in an empire. No one dared challenge them openly. The Council debated, delayed, and diluted every complaint. The smaller species, those without fleets or powerful allies, watched helplessly as their freedom shrank. Then came the signal. It burst through deep space channels one quiet morning, raw and desperate. "This is Helios 9. We are under attack. Virellan forces have surrounded the colony. They demand surrender. We have 12,000 souls here. Human, Lumen, Cathari, even a few young Dralvok. We are not armed. We are not a threat. Please, someone respond." The message repeated on emergency bands for hours. The Council received it. They held an emergency session. But by the time they voted on whether to send observers, it was too late. Or so they thought. On Luna's far side, in a hidden dock buried under rock and ice, Captain Elena Ortiz stood on the bridge of the cruiser, Aurora. She was tall, with short black hair and eyes that missed nothing. Her crew moved with quiet efficiency. They had been ready for weeks. Not for war, but for this. For the moment when silence would no longer be enough. Elena had read the Helios 9 message the moment it arrived. She didn't wait for orders. She knew Earth Command would be tied up in debates, afraid of provoking the Virulons, so she made a call. She gathered every ship she could, 3 modified freighters, 2 medical transports, and 2 old defense cruisers retrofitted with new tech. None carried weapons meant to kill. Instead, their systems hummed with something quieter, smarter: resonance shields. Marcus Bell and Priya Nair had helped design them. The shields didn't blast or burn. They vibrated at a frequency that disrupted Virellan gravity projectors, the same kind being tested near the Kuiper Belt. It was like striking a tuning fork next to a wine glass. The enemy tech would simply stop working. The fleet jumped to Helios 9 in 3 silent leaps. When they arrived, the sight was grim. 3 Virellan warships hovered over the colony, their dark hulls blotting out the stars. Energy tethers reached down, siphoning power from the surface. Civilians huddled in shelters, their faces lit by flickering emergency lights. Elena didn't broadcast a warning. She didn't demand surrender. She just gave the order: activate harmonics. A low hum filled space, not sound, but a wave of energy that rippled through the vacuum. The Virellan ship shuddered. Lights flickered. Gravity beams snapped like broken strings. Alarms blared inside their cockpits. Confused, the Virellan commander tried to fire, but their weapons refused to lock. Their engines stuttered. For the first time in decades, the mighty hegemony was helpless, not from force but from cleverness. While the Virellan scrambled, Elena's fleet moved fast. The freighters dropped shield domes over the colony, protecting it from any last-ditch attack. The medical ships began beaming up civilians, first the injured, then the children, then everyone else. No one was left behind. Even the colony's pets and data archives were saved. It took 6 hours. Not a single shot was fired. Not a single life was lost. When it was over, the Virellan still floated in space, their systems rebooting slowly. Elena's voice finally crackled over open comms. Helios 9 is under human protection. Leave this system. Do not return. The Virellan commander, humiliated but outmatched, gave the retreat order. His ships limped away, their pride wounded more than their hulls. News of what happened spread faster than any ship could fly. Independent drones had been watching. They captured everything: the silent arrival, the strange hum, the peaceful rescue. Within hours, the footage played on screens across the galaxy. On Viridia Prime, delegates watched in stunned silence. On Cathari homeworlds, elders gathered in circles, sharing the data with reverence. On Lumen floating cities, soft pulses of light signaled awe. For the first time, many species saw humanity not as loud or reckless, but as precise, compassionate, and strong in a way that did not need violence. They had faced a bully not with fists, but with wisdom. They had saved lives without taking any. Back on Earth, people gathered in squares and parks not to celebrate, but to reflect. Children asked their parents, "Why did we do that?" And the answer was simple: because it was right. Elena Ortiz returned to Luna without fanfare. No medals were pinned to her chest. No speeches were made. But her name was whispered with respect from Mars to Titan, from the asteroid belt to the outer colonies. The Council, meanwhile, could no longer pretend. Their inaction had been exposed. Their fear had cost lives, almost. Only humanity's quiet courage had prevented disaster. Zorath tried to spin the story, calling the rescue reckless interference. But few believed him. Even his own allies looked away. On Helios 9, now empty but safe, a single message was left on the main terminal. It read, "Thank you, friends." And in that moment, something shifted in the galaxy. Not through treaties or votes, but through action. Humanity had shown that strength could be gentle, that power could serve peace, and that walking away from a table did not mean walking away from responsibility. The stars watched. And for the first time, they saw humanity not as newcomers, but as guardians. A corridor in the silence after Helios 9 was louder than any battle cry. Across the galaxy, species that once ignored human messages now listened. The Cathari were the first to act. Within days, their High Council sent a quiet request to Earth. Share your sensor logs from the Kuiper Belt, not as a demand. Not as a favor. As equals asking for truth. Earth Command hesitated, but Daniel Carter said yes. He knew trust had to start somewhere. What the Cathari found chilled even their cold-blooded minds. The data showed not just tests, but full-scale development of gravitic weapons. Devices designed to crush planets' cores, to collapse stars, to bend space itself into traps. All of it hidden behind fake mining operations and civilian outposts, and all of it traced back to Virilan command hubs. Worse, the logs proved the Virilans had been lying to the Council for years, hiding their violations behind layers of forged reports and bribed inspectors. The Cathari did not act alone. They brought the evidence to the Lumen, whose fluid minds could verify energy signatures with perfect accuracy. Then to the Zenthar, whose crystalline memory banks held every treaty word ever written. Even the Dralvok, who rarely involved themselves in politics, sent a rare envoy. Their people remembered how the Virilans had once tried to strip mine their sacred moons. They had stayed silent then. They would not again. Together, these species called for an emergency session. Not on Viridia Prime, but on neutral ground, a drifting habitat near the galactic core, once used by ancient traders. The Council resisted at first. Archon Vexler, the Virilan-backed leader, claimed the meeting was illegal. But when the Cathari, Lumen, Zenthar, and Dralvok all withdrew their support from regular Council votes, the balance tipped. The session was approved. Humanity was not invited at first. The old guard still clung to pride, but Lena Ruiz had been quietly sharing more data, records of every ignored warning her team had sent over the past year. She released them not to shame, but to show a pattern. One by one, species that had dismissed human concerns now saw their own near misses in those logs. A Lumen research station almost crushed by a malfunctioning gravity probe. A Cathari nursery world nearly destabilized by a routine Virelan drill. All had been flagged by human monitors. All had been brushed aside. Public pressure grew. On a dozen worlds, citizens held vigils holding signs that read, "Listen to Earth." Even some Virilan civilians, tired of their leaders' lies, joined the calls for truth. Faced with crumbling unity, the Council had no choice. They sent a formal message to Geneva. Humanity was requested to attend the emergency session as full participants. Daniel and Lena stood in their office, the message glowing on the screen. No one cheered. They knew this was not a victory, but a test. Would the galaxy finally see them clearly, or would old habits return the moment the crisis passed? On the day of the session, they arrived not with a fleet, but with a single shuttle. No flags, no escorts, just two people carrying data chips and quiet resolve. Inside the habitat, the air was thick with tension. Delegates sat in a wide circle, no head table, no hierarchy. The Cathari elder Vexus rose first. Without drama, she played the Kuiper Belt recordings. Then the Lumen showed energy matches. Then the Zenthar recited treaty clauses the Virilans had broken. Each piece fit like a lock clicking shut. When it was humanity's turn, Daniel stood. He did not accuse. He did not gloat. He simply said, "We tried to tell you. Not for our sake, for everyone's." Then Lena stepped forward. She placed a small device on the central table. It projected a timeline. Every warning, every report, every time humans had flagged Virelan activity. Dates, coordinates, responses, or lack of them. The room fell utterly still. Even Vexler looked down, unable to meet the eyes around him. One by one, species that had once mocked human emotionalism now saw it for what it was: care. Humans had not stayed silent because they were weak. They had spoken up because they cared about others, even strangers, even enemies. Vexler finally rose. His voice was low, stripped of its usual confidence. "These claims require review," but the Cathari elder cut him off. "The data is clear. The harm is real. The time for review is over." A vote was called, not on punishment but on principle. Would the Council acknowledge its failure to act and accept shared responsibility for the risk it allowed to grow? The motion passed with only 3 abstentions. The Virelans sat in silence, their influence broken not by force but by truth. After the session, the Cathari approached Daniel. Vexus bowed slightly, a gesture rarely given to outsiders. "You did not seek power," she said. "You sought safety for all. That is the mark of true leadership." Later, in a quiet corridor, Archon Vexilor found Daniel alone. The old reptilian scales seemed duller, his posture less proud. "I misjudged you," he admitted. "We all did. We saw your passion as noise. But it was signal, and we refused to tune our ears." Daniel met his gaze. "It's not too late to listen now. Back on Earth, news of the session spread. People did not celebrate with fireworks. They gathered in quiet groups, sharing meals, holding hands, looking up at the night sky with new hope. Humanity had not won a war. They had helped the galaxy remember its own values, and as the emergency session ended, a new proposal began to form, not from the old powers, but from a coalition of the willing. A new security pact, built on transparency, mutual aid, and respect, and at its heart an invitation. Would humanity help write it? Daniel and Lena returned to their shuttle. They did not answer right away. They knew trust had to be earned every day, not just in crises but in calm times too. But as they lifted off, Earth glowing blue behind them, they knew one thing for certain. They would not be ignored again. Part 5. The new summit met on Luna, not in a grand orbital station but in a quiet dome built over the Sea of Tranquility. Sunlight streamed through the clear roof, casting long shadows over the low tables and simple chairs. There were no raised platforms, no banners, no guards in ceremonial armor. Just representatives from 23 species sitting as equals. Humanity's delegation arrived early. Daniel Carter wore the same gray suit as before. Lena Ruiz carried a single datapad. Captain Elena Ortiz stood with them, not in uniform but in a dark jacket with no rank, only a small pin shaped like Earth. Inside, the mood was different. No one whispered behind hands. No one rolled their eyes when humans spoke. The Cathari had insisted the first resolution be co-authored by humans and their own scholars. It was called the Accord of Shared Safety. Its core idea was simple. No species would act alone in matters of defense. All would share early warnings. All would protect civilians first. And any use of banned weapons like gravitic disruptors would trigger an immediate joint response. The Viralans were present, but their voice was quiet now. High Speaker Zorath did not lead their delegation. In his place stood a younger Virelan named Trell, known for his work in disaster relief, not conquest. He listened more than he spoke. When it was his turn, he said only, "We ask for a chance to rebuild trust. Not with words, with actions." The room accepted his words not with cheers but with nods. That was enough. As the talks moved forward, humans did not dominate. They listened. They suggested. They compromised. When the Lumen asked for stronger protections for ocean worlds, Lena added language within the hour. When the Dralvok worried about false alarms triggering war, Marcus Bell proposed a 3-step verification system using neutral observers. Priya Nair worked with Zenthar scientists to design a shared sensor network that would beam data to all signatories at once. No more hiding, no more delays. Day by day, the new pact took shape. It was not perfect, but it was honest, and for the first time it included a clause no one had dared write before. Any species that withdrew from the Council in protest would still have the right to return without shame, and their concerns would be heard within 48 hours. Everyone knew who that was for. On the final morning, the delegates gathered to sign. The document rested on a table of polished moon rock. One by one, each representative pressed their hand or limb or sensory pad to the surface, leaving a unique imprint sealed in light. When it was Daniel's turn, he paused. He looked around the room, at the Cathari elder, the Lumen floaters, the stone-faced Dralvok, even Trell the Virelan, and saw not rivals, but partners. He placed his hand on the stone. The light glowed blue, then white, then gold. The accord was sealed. Afterward, Archon Vexilor, no longer Archon, just Vexilor now, approached Daniel outside the dome. The old Virelan's steps were slow. He stopped a few feet away, then bowed his head. "I spent my life believing strength meant control," he said. "You showed me it means protection. That is a lesson I will carry to my grave." Daniel nodded. "Then let's make sure no one else has to learn it the hard way." Back on Earth, people watched the signing live. In cities and villages, on space stations and Martian farms, they did not cheer loudly. They stood quietly. Some cried. Others held their children close. They knew this was not the end of danger. The galaxy was still vast and fear still lived in dark corners, but for the first time they felt seen, valued, not as a problem but as part of the solution. Elena Ortiz returned to her ship that evening. Her crew waited on the deck, not in formation but in a loose circle. No one saluted. They just smiled. She looked at them. Men and women who had risked everything not for glory but for strangers and felt a quiet pride. They had done what was right, not what was easy. Later, Daniel and Lena walked along a path near Geneva, the Alps rising in the distance. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Lena said, "Do you think it will last?" Daniel watched a bird glide across the valley, not because of treaties, but because we showed what's possible, and now others have seen it too. On Mars Colony Theta, Marcus and Priya stood in the same observatory where it all began. The screens now showed peaceful data, star births, comet trails, quiet solar winds. No pulses, no threats. Just the calm hum of a galaxy learning to breathe together. And far out, near the edge of known space, a single Virellan ship drifted. It carried no weapons, only engineers and scientists. They were heading to a damaged Ketheri outpost, sent to help rebuild what their leaders had once tried to break. It was a small act, but it was a start. Humanity had not won by shouting. They had won by standing firm in silence, by acting when others waited, by caring when others calculated. They had walked away from a table built on lies and helped build a new one on truth. As night fell on Earth, lights flickered on in homes. Children asked their parents what the accord meant. The answer was always the same. It means we belong, and in the endless dark between stars, that small blue world shone a little brighter. Not with power, but with promise.